Hi everyone, welcome to our editorial spotlight event, The Exiled Royal, in part two of Insider's Royal Representation Conversations. I'm your host, Mikhaila Friel, Insider's senior lifestyle reporter in the UK. Today I'll be speaking to Yeshi Kassa, a member of the Ethiopian royal family who lived in exile after the revolution in 1974. Joining us is Constance Marks, director of Grandpa Was an Emperor, a documentary film about Yeshi's great-grandfather, Haile Selassie, who served as Ethiopia's last emperor before he was deposed. The film examines the events that led to the collapse of Ethiopia's royal dynasty. It also shares the horrors that Yeshi's family endured during this time. Many of the royals, including the emperor, were killed, while others were imprisoned. Yeshi lived in exile in the UK as she had been studying at boarding school when the revolution began. Now, before we dive into the conversation, I want to remind you all that you can submit a question for Yeshi and Connie using the Q&A box here on insider.com. We'll try our best to answer all of them towards the end of this event, which is estimated to last between 30 and 40 minutes. You can also join the conversation on social media using the hashtag InsiderEvents. Now, to kick things off, let's actually roll the documentary trailer to give everyone who is watching at home a sneak peek of the film.
Mommy, would you mind telling me what you remember about September 12th? This is the last picture taken before our lives went straight to hell. I was really young, and I don't know the whole story. I have to find out what really happened.
I was born in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. Here we go. The emperor is my great-grandfather. But we didn't think of him as the emperor. To us, he was just grandpa. My mommy, I don't think she wanted to be a princess. It was duty more than choice.
The stature of the emperor on a global scale was incredible.
Your Majesty, you're most welcome.
Both of us had a movie camera, but I remember His Majesty saying to me, I don't think you're in a position to be taking films. You're supposed to be in the picture.
Haile Selassie was a very remarkable individual with a great vision for his country. However, he was also a feudal emperor. The political tension began to mount, and it was his head that the military wanted on a plate.
All indications were that the army was about to seize full power.
They just didn't see how hard it was coming. My dad called and said, don't come home because there were troubles. I was cut off not only from my family, I was cut off from my country. So first they arrested Grandpa, and then they arrested everybody else? Yeah. With all the things that have happened, was it worth it being born who we are?
Absolutely not.
Why
Not
do
for
you
me.
say?
We wouldn't have all this trauma.
You've unearthed stuff that you have not wanted to look at your entire life.
It's like, this is your frigging punishment, Yeshi Kassa, for ignoring it for decades and decades and decades.
Time will pass and we'll forget all the details and how it happened. It's very easily forgotten.
That was the trailer for Grandpa Was an Emperor, which is available on streaming platforms including Apple TV and Amazon Prime. It's a truly fascinating watch, so I'd recommend any of you that haven't seen it to go ahead and do so. And now to talk more about the film and the events that inspired it, I'm delighted to introduce Yeshi and Connie, who join us from Insider Studio in New York City. Welcome, it's wonderful to have both of you here. And to kick things off, I'd love to ask both of you if you could give us a quick summary of who you are and how you got involved with the documentary. Yeshi, if you'd like to go first.
I'm Yeshi Kassa, and before anything, thank you so much for having us, Mikhaila. I'm just really happy to be here, and I am the great-granddaughter of Emperor Haile Selassie, and I am the person who narrates the film.
And Connie?
My name is Constance Marks. Good to see you again, Mikhaila.
I'm the producer and director of the film, along with Corinne Lepuk, who is also a producer. And I met Yeshi one night doing volunteer work for the homeless count in New York City. We were part of a group of counters, and we became friends. And that's how the whole thing started. It's a more involved story than that, but that was the night we met, when we were both doing volunteer work at midnight, starting at midnight on a cold January night.
Well, that sounds like a really amazing, natural way to meet. And obviously later you heard about Yeshi's story. I'd love to know if you could tell me your first impressions of one another. And Connie, why don't we start with you? Because I'd be keen to know if you knew of Yeshi's family heritage when you met.
I had no idea whatsoever of Yeshi's family heritage. As a matter of fact, she kind of held out on me for, it's not something that she leads with ever. So we met, and I had been to Ethiopia as a teenager, so that was part of our initial conversation. And as the night went on, it became clear to me that this was a really special person. And it's one of those things, Mikhaila, when you see somebody for the first time and you think, I would love to be their friend, or I want to know how this person became that person. I had that very strong feeling about Yeshi, very powerful. There were a group of 5 of us that were out and about and meeting people who were on the street and had no place to go. And I have to be honest, the number of people in our group kind of fell back a little bit when we came upon one man who was truly destitute and in trouble. And Yeshi was so extraordinary. She just came forward with her gloves, with hand warmers, taking his hand, asking him questions. And it was then that I realized that this was an extraordinary person. I mean, really, it was so evident. And you know, that was my first impression of her. I was like, I want to know who this person is immediately.
That's an amazing story. And Yeshi, can you tell us a little bit of your first impressions of Connie when you met?
Yes, we were doing the Hope Count, as Connie mentioned, and you know when you instinctively know that you're going to be a really good friend with someone. I felt that night. It's like the hardest thing to do. You go out at midnight, it finishes at 3 a.m. It's in January, so we were all under a bit of pressure. But I remember at the end of the evening saying to her, you know, I just moved back from Ethiopia, and my best friend has moved to Hawaii, and my friends are no longer in New York, and would you please be my friend? And I remember you giggled, and you were like, I'm so glad you asked me first, because I was hoping that we could become friends. And then a little later on, you mentioned to me that you had been to Ethiopia, and I said, oh, when? And she said 1973, which was really right before the revolution. And I was like, how is that even possible? And she produced a picture of her mom standing outside our national cathedral. It's like the equivalent of Westminster Abbey in London. And it's so recognizable. And I said, oh yeah, no, you really were there in 1973. So, but that's how we met at the Hope Count. And I just knew we were going to be friends. I was hoping that she'd agree to be my friend.
Yeshi said to me the first time we met that after she told me her family story, she said, we're thinking about either writing a book or maybe making a film. We would love for the story to get out, but we're not sure which to do. And I said to her, do you know what I do? And she said, no, I don't. And I said, I'm a filmmaker. And I said, I think if you make a film, I'm soft sell. I was not pushing, but I said, I think if you make a film, more people will have access to the story naturally than if you write a book. And I would say within 4 to 6 months, I'd met everybody in the family. Corinne had met everybody in the family. They had seen our work, and they asked us to help them tell their story. And we were only too delighted to step aboard and take that on.
Fantastic. And Yeshi, I'd love to ask you about, in the documentary, you spoke in a lot of detail about how the revolution affected your family. And of course, we've spoken about it in the past as well. But for our viewers who haven't seen the documentary, can you give us some details about what it was like for you to watch these horrific events unfold while you were living in the UK?
Yeah, Ethiopia, what Ethiopia went through with that revolution, the only comparison that I can make is like what Cambodia went through with Pol Pot. I mean, it was a savage, savage revolution. And they arrested the emperor, they arrested all of the aristocracy, the men, and the imperial women. And my mom was imprisoned and my dad was imprisoned, and we were lucky enough to be outside, but my sisters were in Ethiopia, and the revolution just kept getting worse and worse. Initially the students and the army and everybody were together, but later on the regime, the Derg regime turned on the students, and then it just got very, very, very savage. And we were blessed to be abroad, but when my sisters had to be taken out of the country, it really was a matter of life and death. My cousins and my sisters had to escape, and at that point, the revolution was eating its own. The students were being killed and then left in the streets. Young people were being killed and left in the streets. And you had to pay for the bullet that killed your child in order for you to be able to take your child and bury them. So, what happened to my family is just a real microcosm of what happened throughout Ethiopia under the Derg regime. I believe it's something like between 500,000 and 1 million people were killed in that revolution. So we were blessed to be abroad. Of course we worried, and my grandmother was in prison, my great aunts, everybody was in prison who was in Ethiopia. For a short time, my sisters were as well. And then they were released because they were so young, so they let them actually leave the prison. But even the streets were dangerous at that time for them, and that's why you see them escaping in the film, because people knew who they were, and they were definitely looking for them.
Wow, I can't imagine having, gone through something as traumatic as this. And it brings me to you, Connie, because I'd love to know, how you approached telling the family's story when it was such a delicate history that they have. Was it a collaborative process, or did you take the lead with that?
Oh, it was absolutely collaborative. And there were times where I would push, and I would always get an answer, but I would get a sense to stop pushing with the questions, the hard questions. But the family really stepped up to the plate, and Yeshi's mom, who we affectionately as filmmakers call her Mama Sebla, but Princess Sebla, led the charge. I mean, she was willing to talk about really tough stuff, very open, very candid, and that surprised me. And I think she led the way for everyone else to feel comfortable doing the same. But I really can't speak for the family. I think, Yeshi, I'd be curious to know if you think that that's accurate.
Oh, it was so accurate. I remember warning both Connie and Corinne, and my family warning them, our mother's not gonna agree to be filmed. She's never even agreed to be interviewed. So it was definitely that my mom had a level of comfort with Connie and Corinne. And I think it was because they really wanted to do the family story. A lot of times people want to do a political story about that time, or a story about the emperor, which is well deserved. But for us, the fact that Connie and Corinne wanted to tell my mother's story and our family story. And I also think it was perfect timing, because my mom had lost
almost all of her siblings and almost all of her aunts at the time when we started filming. And I think she has a very developed sense of duty. So she was prepared to speak about that time, because otherwise there wasn't going to be anybody of her generation who had gone through what she had to tell the story. So it was the fact that Mommy was ready. She felt very comfortable with Connie and Karen. And then I think I kind of chivied my sisters along. I don't even remember asking my sisters and brother if they were ready. But I think when they saw that my mom was ready, that's when everybody was prepared to do it. And I think after your first visit, right?
Yeah, we should say that at the beginning, Princess Sebla said she supported the film, but that she did not want to be on camera. And Yeshi said, what are we going to do? I said, we'll work around it. We'll find a way. And so we went to Virginia. We did the first shoot, and Yeshi's mom observed us. And I think that night, Yeshi called to say, my mom said it's okay. If you want to interview her for 20 minutes on Thursday, you're good to go. And that 20-minute interview turned into a 1 hour, it was a 4-hour interview.
Yeah.
And then we got a call that night. Our mother feels as though she left things out that she'd like to amend. She'd like to add to what she's told you today. Could we meet next Thursday? I think we interviewed your mom a total of 6 times, and the interviews were none of them were shorter than 2 to 3 hours. So she was in. Once she was in, she was really in.
And you know, I want to add that we were showing her footage, you know, which was incredibly painful to her, right? Because the Empress, her grandfather, and there was footage on him, and the 60, which included her brother, who was very young at the time. I think he was early 30s, and my father, they were all killed. So the fact that she was brave enough to sit through that really like encouraged me to, because it's like, if she can manage it, of course I can manage it. But I think I don't think she even cried once in the film. And I cried the entire film, if you've seen it. So
yeah, it's true. It was edited in such a way that you would never know it, but every interview was 2/3 tears.
Yeah.
And we had to kind of cut around that a little bit. It was
amazing.
Tough.
It just speaks to what an amazing job you guys did with those interviews, and really fascinating. Again, if anybody at home watching hasn't seen the documentary, I definitely urge you to. It's very thought-provoking. And also the documentary had a royal fan in the UK. I wanted to ask you both about the late Queen Elizabeth II. You previously told me that she offered her private support to you before you put the documentary out there. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
Yes, I mean, we were blessed because we really did have a good relationship. The Ethiopian imperial family had a good relationship with the British royal family. Queen Elizabeth had come to visit Ethiopia. Grandpa had come on several state visits. Mommy was the princess assigned to take care of Queen Elizabeth when she was in Ethiopia. And also, they had helped to lobby the Derg to release the imperial women and men that were in prison. And I genuinely believe that it wouldn't have happened without the support of the British royal family and the British people, my mom's school friends, and then there were some MPs. So, and after they were released, you know, she used to send us a Christmas card every year, and she would ask about my grandmother before my grandmother passed away. So we didn't have pictures of the Queen's state visit to Ethiopia. We didn't have pictures, any personal family pictures at all, because when the revolution happened, everything in our houses was destroyed, including these kinds of pictures and moving images. So I wrote, and so I felt comfortable writing in a way because she knew who my family were. So I wrote and said, you know, I'm making this documentary about what happened to Grandpa and the family during the revolution, and I was wondering if you had any pictures or anything that you could send me that, you know, I would be able to use in the film. And I got like a very polite note back from her lady in waiting saying, Her Majesty is very interested in your project and would like to encourage you to do it. And I thought that was the end of it. And then about a month later, I got this big manila envelope, and the letter inside said, you know, Her Majesty has gone through her personal photo albums and wanted you to have these pictures of her visit to Ethiopia. And there were a whole bunch of pictures of my mom and my aunts and my great uncle, which was lovely, but we didn't use it in the film because they really were like personal pictures from her albums that had been taken out. But I was happy that she thought that I should do it, and I think probably one of my biggest regrets is that, you know, we weren't able to screen it for her. COVID really delayed things, but one of the biggest things I wanted to do was to screen it for Her Majesty so she could see what we had done. And there's footage of her in the film which my mother had taken with her camera while the Queen was taking pictures with her camera, so it was a good coincidence.
I would just like to add that the letter that Yeshi wrote, the initial letter, I'm sure to anybody in the UK, the language in the letter would not be surprising, but the formality of the letter, and you know, Yeshi's very well versed in these things, how you would write to a royal. It was beyond anything it was really dense with formality, and I was so surprised by that. Since that's kind of the topic of the theme of the day, that was something that was really surprising. I wish I could read it to you today. It's you know.
I would love to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, where it's formal, it's kind of like how we write to my great-grandfather. So it was just like translate that into English. But yeah.
Absolutely, it sounds amazing. But switching gears a little bit, I wanted to ask you both about Buckingham Palace. They did make news earlier this year after declining a request to return the remains of an Ethiopian prince who was buried at Windsor Castle in the 19th century. I'd love to know, how did you feel about that when you heard the news?
Well, you know, like I've said, the British royal family have been incredibly good to my family and Emperor Haile Selassie's family. But as an Ethiopian, it makes me very sad because, you know, we are now living in an era where we're able to exhume bodies in a very respectful and decent manner. We are in an era where looted artifacts are being returned to their countries. You know, an obelisk was returned from Italy to Ethiopia. And this young prince, you know, every literature that you read about him, he was desperately homesick. He always wanted to go home, which is heartbreaking. And I think it would be good for relations between Ethiopia and England, but also it would be good for King Charles to try and be on the right side of history with this. So it would be lovely to know if they've even made an effort to do it. You know, it was an abrupt no, we can't do it because we just can't do it. And I was hoping for a more thoughtful approach and for the British to at least try and send this young man home. And if they weren't able to give us like a good reason why. And you know, like I said, it would definitely be on the right side of history to send this poor boy back home, because he's a member of our royal family, and it makes me sad now to even think about it. He was in exile, like we were in exile, you know, and but we didn't want to go home, but he had a home and he had a family, and I think a little bit more effort would need to be made to try and exhume him and send him home.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you said you didn't want to go home. I know you have since been back to Ethiopia. Can you tell us a little bit about how you you came to that decision?
Well, I was horrible. I was the last member of my family to go home. I thought of Ethiopia as the saddest place on earth. They killed my dad, who I was very, very close to, and I just had such deep anger. And the Derg came down in 1991, and His Majesty's corpse was exhumed then, as was the 60 with my father and my uncle. So my mother went back, most of my sisters went back, most of the family went back for that. And I wouldn't go. I went back in 2000 because my mother said, you know, just go for Christmas, like it's your country. Just go for one Christmas and then you never have to go again. And the minute I landed at the airport, it felt like coming home. In all the chaos of the airport with luggage being lost and everything, I remember in my head thinking, you should have come home sooner, you should have come home sooner. So that's when I went back, and my family were aghast because I went to Ethiopia in Christmas, I came back, I resigned my job, I think in February, and I packed up everything and moved to Ethiopia. So I think I'm probably like the most extreme person in my family, but that's when I went back.
Amazing. I just wanted to share one of our audience questions that somebody has just submitted, and this one is for you, Yeshi. This person has asked, what was you or your family's response when you saw the documentary for the first time?
So I watched it with my mother for the first time, so I was carefully tracking her reaction. And she was so happy with it. We showed it to her in January, right before COVID hit. And then the rest of the family saw it later. But we were thrilled with it because it was genuinely my mom and I telling our story. There wasn't any kind of outside perspective to it. It was our family's perspective. And the fact that Connie and Corinne really had taken so much time to find people who were part of that history. When they found Jonathan Dimbleby, that was amazing. They found the head of the Students' Union when my father was at the university. They found the head of the Teachers' Union when my dad was head of the university. And these were people who at the time really gave my dad a hard time. So when they found them and they put them in the film and they spoke so well about my dad and the things that he did, I was very, very proud of the film. It still makes me cry every time, but I'm just proud that we managed to tell my family's story, and then on a smaller scale, what happened to the emperor and what happened to Ethiopia. Because I think that the thing not to forget is our family went through many hard things, but the Ethiopian people went through so much worse. You know, I have a very good friend, she lost her husband, she lost her 2 sons. It was like that. So the fact that we were able to accurately reflect that, and watching from people's reactions to the film, be they Ethiopian or not, that makes me very proud that we did the film. Like a lot of people, a friend of mine who's Jewish, he said, you know, I've always wanted to ask my mom what happened during the Holocaust, and she refused to speak about it, and now she's passed away, and I'm full of regret, like, look what you did with your mom. So I was just so thankful and happy that we did it.
Fantastic. I just want to remind the audience at home that if you have a question for Yeshi and Connie, you can submit it in the Q&A box on insider.com. You can also join the conversation in social media using the hashtag InsiderEvents. Now, I'd love to take it over to you, Connie, and ask, while you were making this documentary, did it change your perspective of Yeshi as you knew her at the time, or royalty in general? And if so, how?
Interesting question. My perspective on Yeshi, of course, grew, shifted as we got further and further into the story. I came to understand, this is the first, I've been making documentaries for a long time, the first time I've ever made a film about a royal family. And what I didn't understand going into it was that there's a hierarchy in the family. So if there are certain things we wanted to do or to film, and it would have to be put to the family, and it would go up the chain and then come back down the chain, and we would get our answer. I wasn't used to that. It was challenging at times, but it was kind of fascinating at the same time. I had no idea that that would be an element to the process of making this film. But the more I got to watch Yeshi explore what had happened to her family, and you have to understand, they had never talked about it amongst themselves. It was an off-the-table subject until they all agreed to do this film. And I think that's true of a lot of families in Ethiopia. But once they agreed to do it, the strength of the family members, the resilience of the family members of Yeshi, her mom, her sisters, her brother, cousins, it was remarkable. What they had been through and who they are today was something that Corinne and I marvel at to this day all the time. And people who see the film comment on that as well. How remarkably positive they are and loving and just, you know, have an embracing of life where it could so easily have gone the other way after what they'd been through. So I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. And you know, during this panel, we've spoken a lot about your past, Yeshi, but I'd love if you could take us to present day and tell us a little bit about what your life is like now, because you mentioned you did live in Ethiopia for a time, or you visited, and now you're in New York City. So tell us a little bit about you and what you're up to. Is there still, you know, traces of royal tradition within your family? I'd love to know.
Are there still traces of?
Royal tradition?
Oh, yes. So I moved back to Ethiopia, like I said, in 2000. When I came out in 2015, it was very specifically to do this film. But prior to that, I was a Wall Street baby. I was one of those people that screams and shouts on the commodity exchange. Nobody knew who I was. And then when I moved to Ethiopia, I was doing stuff that was related with helping Ethiopia develop, whether first in banking, which is what I knew, and then I was the managing director of a Nike Foundation NGO called Yenya, which helps young girls. So now that the film is over, I'm not entirely sure. I think what I want to do, I was saying to Connie and Corinne, the interest that people have shown in this film, and people say there should be a sequel, there should be lots more stories around that time told, and also that there are these African stories that are seldom told, including the story of Prince Alamayo. So I think what I want to do next is really explore putting some of these stories into film. I think there's such a huge lack of stories coming out of Africa about, you know, whether it be African royalty or, you know, not necessarily just royalty, African stories. So I think that's what I'm going to be doing. I would love to do a film about Prince Alamayo. That would be one of the ones that would be good. And then there are some, historically, you know, when I watched The Woman King, no, is it The Woman Warrior, The Woman King? The one with Viola Davis, which is about the Benin women warriors. You know, Ethiopian women always went to war. Going back into the 1700s, they commanded their own armies. It's a matriarchal society, so there's like these amazing stories out of there. So I would very much like to do some more films and TV about these unknown and untold stories. And I think a lot of people are very interested in it.
That's fascinating to know, because we actually spoke a lot about the lack of representation for international royals. In the last royal panel we did, which is with Princess Keisha and Princess Sarah, for anyone at home who hasn't seen it, you can go on YouTube and it's called Royal Representation. So it's really great to know that this is something that's on your radar, Yeshi. And Connie, I'd love to ask you to weigh in as a filmmaker. What do you feel about this lack of representation?
You know what, Mikhaila, I don't feel, I don't watch a lot of films. I'm like busy working.
You're a filmmaker.
I watch a lot of documentary films, but I don't really have, you know, much to say about that topic, frankly.
Yeah, no worries at all. I'm going to take it to another audience question, and it's again for you, Yeshi. The question is, looking back, is there worth in being of royal heritage?
Is it worth it being of royal heritage?
Yes, is there worth in being of royal heritage?
Is there worth in it? I think so. I have always benefited from who my great-grandfather was. It changes the conversation when people know who you are. And I've benefited from the affection, the global affection that people have for my grandfather. I know some of my siblings would disagree, but when you're little, you don't think you're royal. You just know the life you're living. And for me, it was an amazing life. And I very rarely tell people who I am, but if I do need it for something, and I say who I am, most of the time people will say, oh my goodness, it's Haile Selassie, of course we know about him. And you know, you will benefit from that. But in terms of getting a job or something, your work better speak for itself. I've never used it like that, so I don't know, but we would never use it like that. I think we use it it's worth it for charitable events. It's worth it to have your voice heard by people who value that kind of thing. So I think it's absolutely worth it.
Amazing answer. Now we're just about to run out of time here, so to wrap things up, I wanted to thank you both for coming along and sharing your experiences. And Yeshi and Connie, can you tell me how the documentary has made a difference in your lives, and if there's any upcoming projects you want to share with the audience, please feel free to do so.
You go first.
Okay. Well, it's definitely changed my life. It's given me a second family. We are that close. Yeshi is not only the subject of my last film, but Corinne and I asked her to come along on a project we're working on now to help us with research. We had seen during COVID this video that was going viral. It was called 20 Seconds or More, from an organization called Hip Hop Public Health. And it has hip hop luminaries washing their hands and with an original rap, and it was phenomenal. And we said to ourselves, who is behind this? What is this? I mean, it had over hundreds of millions of hits. And we started to dig, and we actually found at the heart of this enterprise is a doctor of Nigerian descent, a neurologist, who is brilliant and doing the most unexpected and incredible work with hip hop and public health. So we are all, Corinne, Yeshi, and I, endeavoring to help bring their story to light. And we're also making a film about an incredible entertainer who we met when we were making Being Elmo, and it just became evident to us that her story needs to be told because she is like one in a million, and I think people are going to be absolutely captivated with her story. So that's kind of an update.
And as I said, for me, the interest that there's been in this film And in Ethiopian history, I would very much like, and Corinne and I are working on, once the writers' strike is over, getting some scripts to people who want to tell these types of untold stories. You know, Cynthia Erivo is our executive producer, and I think the mission for Edith's Daughter was to tell tales of underrepresented people. So I think it would be a perfect. So I want to do a film about Alemayo. I'd love to do a film about Emperor Tewodros. There's just like so many Ethiopian films that I want to do now. Now that I know that there's real interest out there, I think that's what I'm going to do. And I'm doing hip hop public health with Connie and Corinne.
We were really blessed. Blessed is an understatement that Salome Williams and Cynthia Erivo came on board to be our executive producers. Without them, you know, it would be a different, I don't think we'd be here with you today. They are just the greatest champions of this film, and we're indebted to them beyond words.
Amazing. Well, thank you both, Yeshi and Connie, for this insightful conversation. I've greatly enjoyed it, and I know everyone at home will have learned a lot as well. And to you all at home, thank you for tuning in. The discussion doesn't have to end here. You can share your thoughts using the hashtag #InsiderEvents, and be sure to follow Insider on social media for more of our coverage on the royals and beyond. Also, please make sure to take our event survey, which should be popping up on your screen at any second. I'm Mikhaila Friel. Have a great day and a fantastic year. Thank you.